My first deer I got when I was 16 years old, and at that day there were 6 people in camp. So 3 of them went straight up on this side. Myself, my father, and another fellow went down and drove up the other side of the mountain in a car with plans to meet at the top. Me being a young pup, I was up there, raring to go. I got up to the top a little early, and there was Jack waiting for me. And we were too early to eat lunch. So he said, the rest of the guys are going to be coming along. Why don't you go up and sit on that big boulder up there? So I went up and sat on a boulder and having a great time. And with 5 other people headed to meet at that boulder, it was like the perfect drive from all directions. And sure enough, here comes a little spike buck. And I shot him, and I don't know who was more surprised, me or the buck or my dad or Jack or anybody.
Alright, this is our cabin. It's traditionally known as the Pearl Street Camp. One of the previous hunters at some point in the distant past brought a sign from New York City, I think, that said Pearl Street and leaned it on the tree out front. But it's also always been known as the Langthorn Camp, was one of the previous owners. This is the main room of the cabin. At one time you could sleep like 8 to 10 people here, depending on how close you wanted to sleep. We have beds all over. We have a ancient futon couch, and we have a map on the wall that we used to keep track of where all the deer got taken, but we've long since lost track of where they've all gotten taken. The bear is my dad's first bear. That was a fun one to put up. We have lots of antiques. Well, pretty much everything in here is an antique. We have griddles. We make probably the worst but best pancakes you could possibly eat right over the fire. This fireplace is one of the most functional fireplaces you could ever find. It throws heat better than any modern fireplace. If you look here, it has a crane you can swing just about any pot or cauldron you could imagine out on. And there's been an awful lot of cow and deer cooked over this fire. There used to be a muzzleloader at one time hung over the fireplace. We have a clock that's from the mid-1800s that we've had restored so it functions. And there's lots of just neat relics. These are old lamps. This is a shell from World War I. We like to keep antlers and such. This is actually a map of the Catskill area before the Ashokan Reservoir was built. Actually, before any of the reservoirs were built. Can you point
with your finger where?
So, the original line for the Catskill Mountain Railroad runs this way through what is now the lower and upper basin of the Ashokan Reservoir. You can see all the names of the original towns that are now completely underwater.
I hear that old clock ticking away.
Yep. We have lots of just fun little relics and old creel. One of the old traditions in the past for the deer camp was anybody that slept in a bed had a specific job, and they're posted on the wall. You'll see them tacked up, and we've kept them there just sort of as tradition. Somebody would make breakfast, somebody would boil water, somebody would fill one wood box or another wood box. We have several beds upstairs. This is usually the owner's bedroom. Of course, it's my dad's bedroom now. A couple deer that dad's got in here. There used to be a crocodile skin on the wall.
I remember that. I remember that crocodile skin when I came when I was, 6 or 7 years old for the first time. I remember seeing that here. And it spooked me.
This is kind of a neat old print of the cave up on one of the mountains up here. It's not really a cave, more of an overhang. But it's still something neat to have. Of course, nice. Being an old cabin, we have our share of cobwebs and mice.
Yep.
What old cabin doesn't, though? This is a section of a B-25 Mitchell bomber. It's actually crashed on the mountain near here in the late 1940s. As you can see throughout the entire video, there's no electricity here. It's all gas lamps, candles, wood for heat. We try and keep our cabinets closed, otherwise we get infested with mice. That's unfortunate. There's been a lot of, repairs and alterations to the cabin, and so nothing really fits perfectly, but it gives the place a lot of character. We've rebuilt this whole kitchen. We have our little coal stove and our kitchen stove. And at one time there was a whole collection of antique spinning paraphernalia, wheels and such that were on the wall, and they've been either taken, we've been had people come in and steal stuff before, which is unfortunate.
No, that's too bad.
There's still some old saws and stuff. And this is one of my favorite things, the old farm sink. We used to have running water, spring fed from the mountain. It was just a big barrel and it would give us some water pressure.
Now, where are we headed here, Jason?
Well, this is just an attic. It's got some beds and stuff in it. We don't use it very much because, being that the cabin is way more than 100 years old, the floor's a little shaky, so we don't spend a lot of time up here. Again, lots of old antiques and things around. You can see the old stonework on the fireplace.
And how many hunters could sleep up here at one time?
We used to be able to sleep 4 or 5 hunters up here, depending on how close. A couple of queen-size beds.
Amazing.
When I was a boy, they never plowed this far up in the wintertime. They turned around about a quarter-mile down the road. So we used to come up here in the wintertime just because it was fun. And we'd come up on cross-country skis and snowshoes and tow the food and bedding in with on a toboggan. And the snow sometimes from sliding off the tin roof would build up to the point where sometimes there was only about 2 or 3 feet between the eave of the roof and the top of the pile of snow. You had to kick your way in to get down on the porch. And then it would clog up the woodshed, and you couldn't even open the door to the woodshed, so you had to rely on what wood was in there, or you had to dig it out. And of course, at the time I was 12 or 14, so you know who was leaning on the shovel.
This is the first deer rifle my dad ever had. Shot his first deer with it. It's a Marlin 336 in 35 Remington. It's a fantastic rifle, very accurate, and I also got my first deer with it. I've carried this way more miles than I even can imagine to count. But it comes nowhere near close to my dad's favorite rifle, which is another Marlin. This is a 45-70. This is my dad's very favorite rifle. My mother gave it to him. He's carried it so much, I don't know if you can see it here, that the bluing has actually been completely worn off at the bottom of the receiver. He actually has fingerprints in it from where he carries it. My father actually has 2 of these, just in case this one doesn't work. They're identical rifles with the same scope. He loves this one. This is a beautiful heirloom, and I'm hoping that it'll stay in the family for the rest of eternity. But fantastic rifles, both made by Marlin. And they've been carried all over these woods in this area for our entire lives. So. When we used to get a lot more hunters up here, we've always had a tradition. The night before deer season opens, we'd have a steak dinner inside the cabin. We'd cook our steaks over the fireplace. We'd wrap up our baked potatoes in foil and throw them right in the fire. It's probably the best meal you can imagine.
And how far back does that tradition go?
Oh, as far back, farther back than I can remember, as far back as my dad can remember.
They were doing it when I was a little kid at, 12 and 14 years old. That would have been in late 1960s. They were still doing that.
And did deer season open on a Monday back then?
Yeah.
So when would the guys usually show up?
Anytime from Saturday on. I remember there being 12 and 14 guys here, and it only really sleeps 8. I used to have to set up a cot and have it down first thing because nobody could even walk by the cot. The youngest guy got the cot and didn't get a real bed. Love it. Jack was an organizer. Jack was very, very organized, and what he did is every bed had a little note, and if you slept in one bed, that one there by the creel, that's nearest the fire. So your job was to keep the fire going all night, and to keep the fire, the big fireplace logs in the cabin. The guy that slept in this bed here by the door and the wood stove, he had to keep the wood stove going and the box of stove would fall. The guy that slept in this bed, his job was to trim the kerosene wicks before we had gas lights. I helped put the gas lights in with my father around 1972. So before that it was all kerosene lamps and everybody stunk of kerosene. I don't think that's why they got so many deer back then. And every bed had a little note next to it and a duty that you had to perform. When I was a kid, my parents always brought me up here, but it was never enough times. When I turned 16, I had a $400 Volkswagen on my driver's license. I would come here anytime somebody was here. The first time I pulled in here with this rattly old Volkswagen, Jack came out and smiled at me and says, "Well, you're driving now." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Hang on a second." And he goes back in the cab and he comes back out and he hands me a key. And he says, "Here's a key to the camp." He says, "I want you to treat this place like it was your own." He says, "You don't have to ask permission. You just have to let me know that you're going to be here." That key was one of my most prized possessions.